The reunion of a 96-year-old man with his first love after 65 years. Texas, April. The early morning sunlight gently streamed through the window of William Thompson's small house. At 96 years old, William had spent his entire life in this peaceful suburban home. He sat quietly in an old wooden chair, gazing out at the garden where the lush green grass swayed in the breeze and the cherry blossoms were blooming in clusters of soft white flowers. His eyesight had faded over the years, but his heart still recognized the beauty of the land he had called home for so long. In the corner of the room, the grandfather clock patiently ticked away, reminding him of the endless passage of time. William Thompson, a World War II veteran, had lived through many ups and downs, from the brutality of war to the peacefulness of days like today. He had fought for freedom, facing life and death numerous times. But as time passed, the war became a distant memory, and William's life returned to the simplicity of everyday existence. He married, had children, and lived a modest life surrounded by family and nature. Yet, behind his calm exterior, William harbored a secret. A piece of his heart had been hidden away for more than 6 decades. It was the memory of his first love, a love that was never fulfilled. During the passionate years of his youth, William had fallen in love with a woman named Eleanor Moore. She was the first woman to make his heart race with emotions only youth can understand. They met when both were still young and full of dreams during the harsh years of war. William had just returned from the European front, carrying not only the scars of battle on his body, but also the wounds of war deep in his soul. Eleanor, with her bright blue eyes and gentle smile, appeared like a warm light shining into his life. The two quickly became close friends, and love blossomed during those difficult days. William dreamed of a future with Eleanor, of building a family and living a happy life after the war. But as with many love stories, life doesn't always go as planned. William's family did not approve of the relationship. They believed that Eleanor, who came from a family without wealth or status, was not worthy of their son. Under the pressure from his family, William was forced to part ways with Eleanor. That goodbye was not just the end of a relationship, but also the beginning of a deep wound in his heart, one he would carry for over 60 years. William's first love, that blazing passion of his youth, was slowly buried beneath the sands of time. He went on to marry, raise children, and eventually become a grandfather. The responsibilities of life forced him to forget the past, to bury the dreams of youth that he had once shared with Eleanor. He never spoke of her again, and no one in his family knew that deep within his heart, a memory still lived as vividly as it did all those years ago. But life sometimes has a way of surprising us. When William turned 96, no one thought that the story of his first love would resurface. On a spring morning, his family planned a special event without telling him. His children and grandchildren gathered from across the country, their eyes filled with mystery. They told him that today would be a special day, but no one would reveal more. William simply smiled, shrugging it off. He had lived long enough not to be surprised by life's twists and turns. Around noon, after the family had gathered, the door suddenly opened, and a group of people entered. Among them was an elderly woman, her hair silver and neatly tied back, her face lined with wrinkles, yet her eyes still sharp and bright. She walked slowly, with the steady gait of someone who had seen much of life. As she approached, William felt something familiar about her. At first, he smiled in the way he always greeted strangers, but then his eyes froze when he heard her soft but firm voice. "William, it's been a long time." William felt as if time stopped. A flood of memories from the past surged through his heart. He opened his eyes wide, staring at the woman before him. It was none other than Eleanor, his first love, the woman he thought time and life had long buried. Her voice was still the same, warm and gentle, though her face had changed. William wanted to say something, but his throat tightened. After a few moments, all he could do was smile, a shy, emotional smile. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. Memories of love, separation, and regret surged through the minds of both of them. The years that had passed had not erased the deep emotions they once shared. William and Eleanor, after 65 years of being apart, were finally brought together by fate once again. William, still in shock from the unexpected reunion, slowly stood up from his old wooden chair. He could feel his heart beating fast, his hands trembling as he looked at Eleanor, the woman he thought had been lost to him forever. In that instant, the past seemed to come alive before him, and the memories he had long buried were more vivid than ever. He realized that despite the passage of time, his feelings had never truly faded. Eleanor stood there, unable to hide her own emotions. Although her face bore the marks of time, her eyes still shone with the depth of feelings only those who have lived through great trials can understand. That gaze, it was the same one William had looked into during their youthful, innocent days. She smiled gently, as if to say, "Time may pass, but love never fades." William's children and grandchildren stood quietly by, witnessing this emotional reunion. They understood that they were witnessing a rare moment, the reunion of hearts that had once been torn apart, now finding each other again after so many years. They watched their father and mother, their grandfather and grandmother, as if time had rewound itself, bringing back the stories they had only heard by the fireplace during family gatherings. Stories of a deep first love, torn apart by family and life's harshness. "Do you remember me, William?" Eleanor asked softly, her voice trembling but full of hope. She knew time had changed both of them, and memories can sometimes fade. But deep down, she believed that after 65 years, William would not have forgotten her. William remained silent for a moment. His throat was dry, unable to speak. He raised his hand to quickly wipe away the tears that had begun to fall. Finally, he smiled and slowly said, "How could I ever forget you, Eleanor?" His words unlocked all the emotions that had been locked away in both of their hearts. Eleanor stepped closer, taking William's hand. They looked at each other in silence, as if time and space no longer mattered. In that moment, no further words were needed. They both understood that the love they had once shared was still alive in their hearts, despite the years, the lives they had lived apart, and the trials they had faced. Eleanor sat down beside William, and the two began to share the stories of their lives during the 65 years they had been apart. William, his voice slow and deliberate, spoke of his late wife, his children, and the life of a veteran in the post-war world. He recounted the tough moments, the losses, and the small joys he had found with his family. His voice occasionally faltered when he spoke of painful memories, but he always smiled when he mentioned his wife, the woman who had been his companion after Eleanor had left his life. Eleanor also shared her story, how she had married, had children, and raised them. Her life had not been without challenges and hardships, but she had faced them with a resilient spirit. She recounted her memories, the joys and sorrows she had experienced. But deep in her voice, William could sense that Eleanor, like him, had never fully forgotten their first love. Their children and grandchildren stood around, listening to these stories with reverence. They realized that love doesn't just exist in moments of happiness, it survives even when life has separated those who love each other. Over the long decades, the love between William and Eleanor hadn't faded. It had simply waited for the chance to be reborn. Outside, the Texas sky was bright and blue. The sunlight filtered softly through the window, casting a gentle glow on William and Eleanor's intertwined hands. They sat together, no words needed, simply feeling the presence of one another. Their children and grandchildren couldn't hold back their tears, not just because they were moved by the love between the two elders, but because they had witnessed a true-life fairy tale, a story of love that had endured despite all the trials of time and fate. "I always knew we would meet again," Eleanor whispered. "There are so many people in this world, but fate still brought us back together." William didn't say anything, but he held Eleanor's hand tightly, understanding and agreeing with the silent promise between them. In that moment, they both knew that, although their lives had taken different paths, their love had never truly been lost.